Blood, Sweat and Metal, well, it should be the Rocket Diaries because that's our name now, the Rocket Diaries. And basically, the name of this show is not only do we talk to musicians around the world, but we're also trying to get a little bit into their life, a bit of a background type of story, a little bit of a bio type of thing. But joining me tonight is same brother from Deamon Pyre, who unfortunately, with the word gone out that they're going to be hanging up after this new album that's going to be released very shortly on the 25th of May. And good evening, Sam from Sydney, my hometown, man.
How you going, man?
Good, man. And with the current situation that this pandemic or the coronavirus, whatnot, we need some entertainment, man. And from what I'm hearing, that concert's not going to be the same as it once were. And let's get into that before we talk about the history of the band. How are you guys coping with it all? Because these venues are going to be restricted from what I'm hearing, and when they're going to be lifting up like the stage 3 process, only 100 people going to be in a gathering, which is kind of like what the clubs around Adelaide was getting anyway, like the Enigma Bar and Fowler's Live and so forth. But for you personally in the music scene, how is that going to cope? Because you've got a new album, you want to perform that material to the audience, but with the restrictions that are currently in place, how are you guys going to do the farewell hurrah, so to speak?
Well, with us, man, we're probably one of the only bands that doesn't face that challenge because with this record, we actually made the decision that we weren't going to tour it because the band effectively has been in hiatus for a couple of years. I left the band a couple of years ago to focus on health and my family, change careers. And Andy, our lead guitarist, he moved over to California to pursue some new work goals. So we're kind of spread all over the place, and we decided that with this record coming out, unlike what most bands would do, they'd tour it and they'd promote it. We decided that this was going to be the last record. That, given that we're all kind of spread all over the place and we've got other priorities right now, but we'd written songs that we really liked and that we're really proud of, and so we decided, like, let's put the record out there, but we just wouldn't back it up with live performances. And so we've kind of done it all digital. It's obviously, we haven't done a physical release. It's just available on digital and streaming platforms. It actually came out today on the 22nd, and so far people seem to really be enjoying it. And yeah, so those challenges that the current pandemic represent from so many of the bands in the entertainment industry out there, thankfully we're one of those bands that it's not going to have an impact on us because we had no intention to tour this record. We just decided that we love the songs so much, and we wanted to put them out there as a final farewell, because the band kind of just stopped moving when I left, and then when Andy moved overseas, and it was really just a couple of the guys left, and we never really put like a final pin in it. And yeah, probably 12 months ago, the guys rang me up and said, hey man, like, we know you're done with the band, and that you're busy and that you've got other things going on, but how do you feel about coming back and writing the vocals and having one last hurrah with us? And because we're such good friends and we had such a good time in Deamon Pyre, and the guys made it such a stress-free situation for me, I thought, that's a really great way to come and just tie a final knot in everything. And it was probably the best recording process I've ever been a part of, and the most fun I've ever had as a vocalist and a lyricist to be involved in that with my buddies, and true testament to the friendship and their faith in me, in coming to me and saying, hey, we know you left the band, but do you want to do this? I mean, I was pretty blown away by that.
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, I kind of left them high and dry, and they understood why. But to have them come and say, you know, we're friends, man, and we really love working together as a team, that really, yeah, I was really blown away by that. And I still, I'm really quite humbled by that and encouraged as a, you know, on a friendship level. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, come back to your original question about the challenges that COVID-19 represents. We are one of the very few lucky ones. It's not going to really have an impact on the plans that we had for this record because, yeah, we had no intention to go and tour it. We're kind of spread all over the place, focusing on other priorities. So, yeah, I mean, obviously the pandemic represents some pretty unique challenges for the entertainment industry. And I know a good chunk of my friends that work in it, either as stagehands or agents or, you know, that run labels or live venues, they've all been hit really hard by it. So it'd be interesting to see what's going to happen over the next few months and years, how bands respond and how agencies and venues and anyone and everyone in the industry responds. Hopefully, as somebody that's spent a good portion of my life in the entertainment industry, I really, you know, hope for all their sakes that all those hardworking and passionate and dedicated musicians and music fans figure out a way to, you know, get things back to normal and that they can survive.
Well, that's what we need. We need some type of entertainment, some type of normality back in our lives. And the problem that I have reading between the lines that they're going to stop mosh pits in venues. How are the people going to enjoy themselves? Because that's part of our lives, just moshing. I mean, I'm not talking about kicking and punching into each other, but how are you going to do a wall of death? How are you going to dance and whatnot? Are we going to go back to the 1950s where the dance floor was all seated and you only just stand up and sit down and applaud, not really dancing that much? Are we going to go back to those type of things? Because I saw an article from Lardwire last week or the week before, the diagram of the setup of what concerts will be like once they start lifting these restrictions, and it's just ridiculous. Like over in America, they've got a 6 feet distancing from social distance. Here in Australia, it's 1.5. We're a little bit lucky on that thing. But if they're going to reduce, and this is a story that I've been hearing from some promoters overseas and venue holders, they're going to reduce some of these venues by up to 80% with all the restrictions. And whether or not that people got to be scanned in or whatnot, that's another thing. I'm not getting to the political side of things, but this is what they call the new norm, and I'm not comfortable with it. I mean,
it's I mean, obviously it's a challenge, right? Because, you know, the health professionals and the governments and the politicians and everyone on the one hand want to keep people safe as best they can, and on the other hand, as you rightly point out, heavy metal, particularly rock and roll, it's always had a really visceral, physical element to it. And like, you know, you take Daemon Pyre, like when we were performing live, a big part of what we became known for and what we liked to do was that our live show had a bit of theatricality, you know, a bit of crowd participation. I would frequently get off the stage and get into the pit and get in right, and I'd pace around on the floor. You know, if it was a smaller show with, you know, 50 odd people or whatever, I'd be in there, making sure that I got involved and, you know, with the, you know, all the war paint and everything else as well. Try to make it a fun experience for people. I guess on the flip side, just to look at it from another side, I've always felt that the best thing about music is that you get to enjoy music however way you want.
Exactly.
So if that's an expression, a physical expression of your enjoyment, you know, to bang your head and to mosh and to, you know, crowd surf and wall of death and whatever else, you know, that's fine. And obviously as an entertainer, you like that because you feed off the energy of the audience. And if they're just losing their minds, you know, there's a real adrenaline kick that you get from that. And there's a real energy that you get from that. And it drives you to push yourself even harder. But on the flip side, there have been days, you know, and particularly different kinds of bands too, like where I've said, I'm going to go sit at the back because I want to just be immersed in the whole experience. You know, you go, you know, you see a band like, I don't know, say Catatonia, for example, and you don't really want to be smashed around, you kind of want to like sit back and soak it up.
Yeah.
Whereas, you go see a band like Behemoth or whatever, and you kind of really just want to get in there and get crazy. But yeah, like as I said, I've always been an advocate for people just choosing to enjoy music how they want. I would hope that, with these restrictions in place, people still find a way to derive some enjoyment from the live experience, whatever that happens to look like moving forward. And look, the world seems to hopefully be getting to a place where it understands this virus a little better than it did a few months ago. I guess we're probably going to find a path out of this rather than get stuck in it, before too long. So I don't know. I guess optimism is probably the best course of action.
Yeah.
We don't really know anything just yet, or enough just yet to know what it's going to look like. I mean, as I said, most of the people I know that are in the industry and make a living from it, their key priority is just going to be, how do we keep art and entertainment financially sustainable so that we can continue to create it for people that enjoy it. Because, obviously art and entertainment can often be a severely undervalued commodity. Obviously that started to rear its head with the mass pirating of music through, CD burning, and then of course MP3 technology and then beyond. When that happened, certain countries in particular started to devalue the importance of art. And in a weird way, this pandemic, and some people have said this online, I thought it was actually really quite a important point to make, is that imagine going into lockdown or quarantine without art in your life. Imagine being told that you had to quarantine yourself, and you couldn't read a book, you couldn't watch a movie, you couldn't listen to music, no stories, no podcasts, no nothing. You'd literally just be sitting in a room with nothing to do except try and entertain yourself. So in a weird way, being forced to quarantine, being forced to lock down, has probably reminded people of the value of and just how much art and entertainment enriches the human experience. So in a weird backwards kind of way, again, maybe I'm just a little more optimistic than I used to be. Probably can't draw a silver lining out of it.
That's what we've got to do. We've got to try and keep positive over all this. But when you see bands like Metallica postpone their concert tour last year, and Kiss and so forth, it was just like a pattern. And then I went to see, my last concert I went to was Alice Cooper before the lockdown happened, and with with Airborne. And 2 weeks after that, that's when the restrictions start to come into place. And we had Iron Maiden, Faith No More, so forth. Dream Theater all postponed their tours. And more frankly, with our international borders going to be shut, and I'm hearing up to 2023, we might not get these international acts that's already been rescheduled for the summer of next year. So trying to keep optimistic is one thing, but the reality is, with the government putting their restrictions in place, which makes it harder as a broader spectrum for bands to come to Australia. And not only that, they need to quarantine for themselves for 14 days before they even play a gig. It's just going to be a chain reaction after chain reaction, and it's going to be a while before we really get back to normal. But hopefully, the local bands, like here in Adelaide, Chris Corroded and so forth, Alkira, who just recorded a new single, they can go out and do some gigs, because got some breaking news, Sam. We just opened our pubs and restaurants today.
Yeah, I just saw, yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully we can start getting some entertainment.
But that's the thing, you might find, and again, maybe I'm being far too optimistic, but one of the ways that you could look at it is that local talent will become the primary focus, because you won't have the option of seeing international artists. They'll have to stay within their own territories and reconnect with their local audiences.
Right.
And that includes Australians. So if we can't travel overseas for a couple of years, local entertainers are going to be the go-to, artists that venues and agencies will book.
Right.
And as someone who grew up, like I'm 36 now, I kind of came through, in the Western Sydney metal and hardcore scenes. And one of the things that we all enjoyed as young musicians kicking off was when we do a run with like 2, 3, 4 local bands, and you'd go play PCYCs and youth venues and stuff like that, and it would just be like 3 or 4 Aussie bands, and you'd have a real good turnout because the local scene was so strong. And then we had this massive oversaturation of international artists come into Australia. And in some respects, I mean, I know it's probably not the same in Adelaide, because I know that sometimes Adelaide gets missed out a little bit, but in places like Sydney and Melbourne in particular, there's been like an oversaturation of international acts that come through, to the point where sometimes you look on any given weekend and there's like 3 or 4 different international acts who are also bringing international supports with them, and you've got to choose which one you want to go to. So,
exactly.
As I said, maybe I'm just getting really optimistic in my old age, but this might just reset it a bit and place a bit more value or focus on local talent again, which is probably a good thing,
Yeah, that's it, because I'm originally from Sydney. I know, for speaking on personal experience, in the western part of Sydney, like you go to Newtown and you go out to Parramatta or all the way up to Penrith, there's always a gig going on. And you're right, man. It goes back to the old days, of the grand old 70s and early 80s, when Australia was flourishing with local talent.
Yeah.
Before Countdown got pulled down from ABC, there wasn't our music scene was just flourishing, and then they put the pokies in, and then it was a bit harder. But when it comes to the metal side of things, our forefathers, the granddaddies of them all, like Mortal Sin and Hobbs Angel of Death, they're the ones that started the underground movement here in Australia, and got these local boys on board, and then they got the international stardom like they did. And you guys also had some of that in your career. Like, you've been overseas, you recorded albums overseas, you've been playing with artists overseas like Arch Enemy and Tesseract and so forth. But when it comes down to Australian artists, some of these bands just don't get the recognition that they deserve.
Yeah,
and, like, look at Airborne. They're huge overseas, but here in Australia, they're not getting the recognition they deserve.
Yeah.
It's a catch-22. Now it's a time for the Australian music, whoever it is in the hierarchy, start pumping them out and start supporting them, because there's not really major labels out here in Australia compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah, the way I used to describe it to people when I ran a record label and I worked at a recording studio, was it simple economies of scale, right? Like, we've only got a population of 25 million people. If you play in like a niche genre or a smaller genre of music, like heavy metal, and then you play within a specific subgenre underneath that, which is even more niche, say, I don't know, black and death metal, for example, it's going to have a very particular fan base. And if you've got a population of 25 million, and let's say maybe you appeal to somewhere between 1% and 5% of that population, or 1 to 5% of the population likes that style of music, they may not even like your version of that.
Yeah.
Your potential pool is quite small. Whereas if you go to Europe or the US, or some of the larger parts of the world with much larger populations, that literally goes up to the power of 10. So it's I think it's a combination of, we're just a smaller country with a smaller potential fan base. Part of it, I think, too, is that our mainstream industry, our mainstream entertainment industry, and our media doesn't really have a lot of time or energy to give to metal, despite bands like Parkway Drive and North Lane and The Artist Murder just destroying the ARIA charts and going and playing in front of like 100,000 people in Europe. There's still, the Daily Telegraph is still going to give 10 pages to the rugby league and not give a shit about heavy metal, or even just mainstream. I remember when I was younger, man, you'd open up a newspaper and there was at least a few pages dedicated to the arts and entertainment. And these days, most of it's overrun by sport. So part of it, I think, is cultural. And I've said that before. I think Australia's culture very much leans more towards sport as a primary form of community and a primary form of entertainment. But and then I said, yeah, as I said before, like couple that with the fact that we just have a much smaller population. You're not going to have the ability to reach out to as many people as you are overseas, and that's what's driven a lot of Aussie bands that are real good caliber to go and try and build a fan base overseas first, and almost do that, and then come back to Australia.
Right.
Because if they give a shit about you in the US or in Japan, and then you come back, there's a good chance they're going to pay a bit more attention, to you here, because you've kind of done the hard work over, in countries that are a little bit more supportive of metal. But again, that's not to say that we don't have a really strong, passionate underground here as well. There's always been that DIY underground vibe here in Australia for hardcore and for metal. And I don't see that going anywhere. I think, if anything, as I said, silver lining out of this whole thing is it'll probably grow stronger.
Yeah, see, most of the metal community is more underground based. That's where it came from the underground.
Yeah.
And yeah, metal has never really been popular, no matter where you look at it. It really hasn't been popular compared to dance and pop music, because the Australian culture's always been like the flash of the pan, who's hot on the charts at the moment, and give it 4 years after that, no one really talks about it. We had the Beatles phenomenon, we had Kiss here, we had ABBA. All that was like a flash in the pan, because I remember when Kiss came in 1980, it took them 15 years before they came back to Australia. By the time they came around, most of the people didn't really care anymore. And I think that's what comes to us. I think that's what comes to Australia is, and especially in the metal community, it's a little bit of a short attention span. If they're not producing an album, they'll just find someone else to jump on board. And that's how it is. And another thing too, fans will pick and choose who they want to listen to in the metal community, because the thing that I see a lot over the last 10 years, that a lot of fans will start pigeonhole bands in certain categories. If it's not thrash, they won't listen to it. If it's not death metal, they won't listen to it. It's a bit of flavour for everyone. I mean, for me personally, being not just a critic of the music scene and that, but I'm also a fan. The more music that's out there for everyone, the better. And that's what it should be. The more music out there, the more flavour, people can get on board, buy their record or buy their merchandise, or more importantly, go and see them. Because like you said, Sam, you can get 5 or 10 bands, you got to pay $15-20 and you have a good night out, rather than paying $180 just seeing 2 bands. So
yeah, and the reality too is that with international acts, the ticket prices have to be so high because the economy's changed, and they're traveling very long distances to get here, and obviously a part of that is due to the fact that there are other forms of revenue that they relied on over the years. Some of them are drying up. Physical sales, is all but dead. Merchandise has become quite expensive to ship around the world as the cost of shipping became more expensive. So realistically, the largest source of revenue for bands has obviously shifted to things like merchandising and touring. But I don't know. I also, as I said, like I sort of look at it as an opportunity for the caliber and the quality of bands to improve as well. So you're talking about flash in the pan stuff, man. Like, I think that kind of reminds bands that when they're working hard on their material, like that they've really got to step their game up. If you want to turn heads, you've kind of got to make sure that the quality and the caliber of what you put together is high. And I think I'm just going off on a tangent here for a minute. I think when record labels kind of lost the ability to act as gatekeepers, we got like this massive influx of just this massive bombardment of music. Thanks to things like SoundCloud, you could just record songs and dump it out there and just do your own thing, and you could, build a huge cult following just off of SoundCloud. And of course, obviously, that's going to happen if the quality of the product is good. But yeah, whilst labels sometimes have copped a bad rap in the past for some of the things that they've done, and in some instances rightly so, they did kind of act as like the gatekeepers, and sort of they'd be the ones to say to bands, yeah, it's good, but it's not great. Like it's like I know there's a particular head of over at Nuclear Blast, and the first question he always asks when he looks at listens to a new record is, it might be good, and you might say, yeah, it's good, but what makes it different? What makes it unique in that style of music? Why would I care about it? And I sort of think that's something that bands need to sometimes remember, is that you got to look at it and go, well, have we done something that just sounds like everything else, or have we done something that kind of might be just tweaking it just slightly? One of my favorite bands of the last decade is a band called Silosis. And you look at Silosis and it's like, yeah, they draw heaps of comparisons from people to, the likes of Metallica and Gojira, and because they're like a progressive melodic death metal band that basically are a fusion of bands like Death, Metallica, and Gojira, and have that kind of that ambience and that beauty mixed with that thrash and shred. But the caliber of the songwriting, the caliber of the composition, the caliber of the production is just so high. Josh Middleton as a songwriter is just so incredible, that they were able to break beyond the comparisons to the old guard and more modern bands like Gojira, and build a following of their own. And I think you got to have that thing. You got to have that quality. It's like what they say on those bullshit fucking reality shows. What's your X factor? What's your thing that's going to make you stand out? So
I can go on for hours talking bad about X Factor because it's just so much hypocrisy in that. It's like manufactured garbage to me. Manufactured. They just get people together and say they've got talent, and put it like they did with the Pussycat Dolls and Spice Girls and crap like that. But with your band Daemon Pyre, we look back at the history of your band, how you all manifested and you all had the same common goal is to continue to make collective music and to work more at it, even though when you first started would have been baby step, but then you got your first break and go, whoa. And then you go to the next one and the next one. I mean, I remember seeing you guys for the first time here in Adelaide many years ago. Well, not many years ago. It felt like many years ago, but it wasn't. But I remember seeing it, just the craftsmanship and the teamwork and the brotherhood that you guys perform. It just shows how much dedication and how much hard work that you guys put into your craft. And you being a primary songwriter and that shows and that dwells with what your material, especially this last album that you guys recorded, it shines off. It shines off very well. And when I heard Red Sun Phenomenon, that's the last single that's been released, man, you can just tell that, hey, we paid our dues, we paid the chops. Here's it is, folks. You either like it or you don't. But for me personally, being a fan and also have to review your album because I got it on Drop Cloud. Thanks to Chris Marrick. I want to say thanks to Chris Marrick for giving it to me. It just shows you guys how much you have matured over the years from where you first were to now. And
thanks, man. Yeah, thank you. I mean, we're all older guys now. Our age, the age of all of us, ranges from early 30s through to mid 40s. And like most people, man, you spend your entire life learning, making mistakes, taking chances and making mistakes again and learning again. And, every single one of us in Deamon Pyre has been in a number of bands beforehand. We've, as I said, learnt along the way the things to do, things not to do. And I think when you come into a band with seasoned touring musicians and recording artists, and you've decided as a team from the very beginning how you want it to go, using all those previous life lessons and those previous lessons from the industry, it can, if you're switched on enough, it can accelerate the process. Like for us, Deamon Pyre was only built in 2014. So really only 6 years ago. And within about 1 to 2 years, we'd already managed to get an album out, and be playing and supporting with artists that we've looked up to for ages, like, The Haunted and Insomnium and Psychroptic and, a lot of big bands that we really looked up to. And then we had bands like King Parrot take us under their wing. And in the early days, like even just well-respected local talent like Hadel Moore throwing us on a tour, the very, very early days. If you've got your head screwed on and you know that you've got like at least a solid product, or at least you back it, and you've gotten some outside counsel as well, because that's important too. Like I think music's subjective. Obviously, everybody's got their own opinion and everybody's got their own tastes, and you could be a one-man grindcore artist with a microphone and a tin can, or you could be a symphonic classic heavy metal band that has insane 28-piece classical arrangements and hyper skill behind it. At the same time, you still need sometimes somebody on the outside to look at it and go, are we there yet? Is it quality, or is it okay? Like, where are we up to? And you mentioned Chris before, Marek, and he was like very much a part of that for us, because we all knew Chris from previous bands and from working with him, and knowing him through, like, I used to run a radio show and I used to run a label and used to manage a recording studio, and I've been in previous bands and I worked with Marek on a bunch of stuff. And then he and I developed a really strong friendship years and years ago. Same with Andy. Andy'd known Chris for some time. And in fact, Simon, our other guitarist, same thing. He'd grown up with Marek and known him for a while. So when we started Deamon Pyre, because As Silence Breaks basically was a couple of us that are in Deamon Pyre, and that was none of the original members of As Silence Breaks. We'd all come in later. And we decided it was time to put that name to bed. And it just moved so far away from what As Silence Breaks had started off as. And so we thought the best thing to do, just to honour what As Silence Breaks had started off as, and the previous members that were in it, was like, we just need to close this down and start fresh as something new. And before we did that, before we even had a band name, we went down the pub with Marek and said, hey man, here's what we're going to do. We want to hit the ground running. We want to have a plan together about, how Deamon Pyre is going to come out of the gate. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of younger acts don't just have the benefit of a bit of lived experience and a bit of lived wisdom. They don't know to do that. So I tell a lot of young guys that are asking me questions, or have done over the years, what's the most important thing? And I'm like, well, if you know what you've got is solid, if you know that your musicianship is good and your composition is good and your teamwork is good and everybody knows what part they have to play, the other big piece of the puzzle is having somebody that can go out there and spruik you, and talk about you, and get people to pay attention. And for us, that was Marek, because a lot of people trust him. His network is strong and it's wide. He's got proven skills as a publicist. And so for us, I think a big part of why Deamon Pyre kind of hit people's radar quickly was that we had that plan in place from the beginning. I think that's a big part of what leads to people paying attention right from the very beginning.
Yeah, because like you were mentioning, that 2014 was 6 years ago, but it felt like it was a decade ago.
Yeah.
If you look back in time, because time's moving so quickly. So the question I want to ask, Sam, when you go into the mindset of writing the material for Deamon Pyre, what type of things you're looking at, and where do you get your inspiration from when you write these songs? Because just listen to like Red Sun Phenomenon and so forth, you can tell that it's just a chapter telling a story as it goes along. And that's what albums should be, telling a story, rather than doing a whole concept type of thing. Like I'm not digging concept albums, but there are some concept albums that say, hey, that's a bit too much, man. You're trying to put too much thought and process into it. It should have been spread out a little bit further. But saying that, how did you get your interpretation and your inspiration to write the material that you currently do?
With the new record, it was actually the first time I'd ever done an album from a lyrical point of view that way. Because the record, from a creative process point of view, was really disjointed. Like the guys had started working on the music for this record immediately after the first album came out. So I had heard a lot of the raw demo stuff 8 years ago, even before I left the band. And so I sort of knew where some of the stuff had started from. And then we recorded 2 of the songs that are on this album. We actually recorded them before I left the band with Lachlan Mitchell, who used to play in Nazul, and he recorded bands like the Amenta and even like mainstream bands like the Jezebels, and I think he won ARIA for working with them. And he's an awesome producer. And so Loud and Blasphemous and Unto a Dying World, 2 of the songs on the record, I recorded vocals on those years ago before I even left. Those songs were already done, and we had Kevin Talley play drums on them. And then the other 8 tracks on the record, we had Dan Preslin from Near Blue Scarus play drums on those. And they were recorded. They were tracked in Andy's bedroom with Matty, our bass player, and Kyle, who was a previous member of Our Silence Breaks. He was a member of Our Silence Breaks, but he was also one of the first members of Daemon Pyre. He came back into the fold as well and co-wrote most of the album with Andy, and also helped with some of the pre-production and stuff like that. And then some of the boys went over to Thailand to work with one of my old work colleagues, Shane Edwards, who headed up Karma Sound Studios over in Thailand, and he'd worked on bands like North Lane and a bunch of big bands. And then I stayed in Sydney and I did the vocals at Electric Sun Studios with Dave Petrovic. So it was like everyone was everywhere, and all the pieces were kind of getting put together in multiple different countries, multiple different kind of teams working on different things. So in saying all that, from a lyrical point of view, when the guys rang me up and said, "Hey, we know you're out of the band and we know you're busy, but do you want to do the record with us?" I wanted to write the vocals in a very different way to how I've ever written them. So most records I've written in the past, for bands I've been in, I've always written lyrics down, had a message or a story that I wanted to tell, and then I'd find the songs that the guys had written and I'd try and fit those vocals into those songs. With this album, because I knew the music so well, and I'd already started working on lyrics years ago and had all these half-finished ideas, I kind of scrapped a lot of it and went, okay, I'm going to listen to the music and then let the music inform the lyrical choices instead of the other way around. So for the first time in my creative career, I kind of went into it with no set idea on what I wanted the songs to be about. So they're a little more esoteric than the stuff that I've written before. There's a few songs that have a message, like Loud and Blasphemous is a story about a woman who's grown up in a theocratic society and she's being threatened, and she's this warrior woman who doesn't want to be told what she can and can't do. And she blasphemes against the religious theocratic police and her family, and behind that, and that was kind of like the idea. I love the idea of a fierce heroine, figure fighting against, theocracy. So that had a story and a kind of message behind it, and same with Unto a Dying World. And there's another track on the record, Enslaved God Scenario, which was, I started to read some stuff by to do with AI by a really smart guy called Max Tegmark, and he talks about this one state of AI called the enslaved God, which is basically like if artificial intelligence is created and it's not aware of how much more powerful it is than the people it serves, it kind of represents this enslaved God archetype. So there was some songs on the record that were kind of inspired by, cool stuff that I was into or that I was interested in, but then kind of were more about feeling. Like I would listen to the music and then write the lyrics that felt like they made sense, matched against the melodies and the rhythms and the layers that the guys had created in the music. So in that respect, most of the record is more open to people taking the lyrics and making them their own and making them mean something to them more than probably in the past where I had a specific idea about what I want to say. Yeah. And so, songs like Red Sun Phenomenon are very much more, I would hope, more majestic and, more, I guess, wide-reaching in terms of their appeal to, people can gravitate to parts of that song lyrically and have fun with it in their own way. This record from that point of view was very different for me from anything I've ever done. And as a result, I personally think that it's probably the best lyrics I've ever written because I tried to not go into it trying to prove a point, or send a
Yeah,
message, which I think in a way made the vocals better.
yeah. So, in that standpoint, would you consider now to write material for other bands now that you're not longer doing Daemon Pyre?
When I left the music industry a couple of years ago, man, and left Empire, I kind of did say to people that I probably wouldn't be able to stay away from music, because it's been a lifelong passion, is being creative and playing music, and actually the boys and I were talking tonight, like we've had a few reviews come through already of the record, and like I'm absolutely blown away that like we're getting like 3.5 stars out of 4 and 90%, 9s out of 10s, and when you see stuff like that, it kind of it does stroke the ego just a little bit. And go, I want to keep writing songs, but yeah, I always said that I was leaving for a reason, and that was me personally, I was a lot heavier than I am now. I personally was not healthy. I had some family stuff to deal with. My wife and kids needed my attention more than I could give them.
Especially now with the situation I'm in.
Yeah, and I also wanted to change careers. I'd spent most of my life in the corporate world, and I wanted to get into doing something very different. So I launched into that journey and succeeded in getting into that. And but having said all that, I always knew I probably wouldn't be able to stay away from music for forever. So whether it's writing some songs with some of the boys from Deamon Pyre just in the background just for fun, or whether it's doing something else or another project in a few years' time, who knows? But for the moment, I'm liking where I'm at. I enjoyed very much this process, and the fact that there was no pressure associated with it. It was actually, for the first time in a long time, it was about getting back to being creative and enjoying that process. So yeah, man, never say never.
Yeah, well, basically what you're trying to say, that music will never leave your system. It's more like a part-time job now rather than being a full-time job, and you're trying to do what you can to looking after your family and whatnot. Because when these new bands starting to pop up, these young kids there, they just want to hit the top as soon as they hit the stage, and you've got to learn the craft and learn the chops a bit. You've got to go through the trials and tribulations and so forth. What is the best advice that you can give to these younger kids that may be playing in the garage, learning a new song right now, and trying to get, hopefully, a live show get together?
Honestly, I'd say the most valuable lesson I've learned is at an individual level and at a band level, having an agreement from the beginning about what you hope to get out of it, like what your goal is. So if your goal is to make music your full-time career, to generate an income from it, because the reality is that we all do stuff in our lives, either for fun and enjoyment or to survive. The simple truth of the matter is that the world of heavy music is very different to where it was a couple of decades ago, and the ability to generate revenue from it is tricky. And as I said, particularly if it's a subgenre of metal, if it's a more mainstream style of metal, you might have more of a shot in certain parts of the world. Or if you're just the perfect package, like a band like Parkway or a band like North Lane, who, by the way, have busted their balls for a very long time to get to where they've gotten to. It's been, for bands like that, it's been a combination of talent, hard work, a great network behind them, a rampant fan base that support them, everything about them just lined up, but it's taken a long time. There's no real sort of overnight successes. They don't really exist. You might think they do because you've just heard about the band, yesterday, but you look back on their history and you realize that, I remember I played with Parkway back in 2005 or 2006 in my very first sort of band. We played a local festival with them. There was about 1,500 kids there after Killing with a Smile had just dropped. And, at that time, they were only just overtaking I Killed the Prom Queen in terms of like stature, because those bands that like I Killed the Prom Queen had taken off and had sort of built up Parkway and done that split EP, taken them on tour, and then all of a sudden it kind of just started to tip this way. But everyone starts somewhere. So yeah, I think the big thing, and again, the limited success that Daemon Pyre had, we had that success because we went into it right from the very beginning, understanding what we wanted out of it. We said, instead of this being a full-time career, we wanted to make an album every couple of years. If we got to do maybe one international tour once a year, if the band could get to a point where it paid for itself, it wasn't generating huge amounts of money, but it wasn't costing us much money either out of our own pockets. And if we got to do, a few national tours a year, that was like our end goal. Whereas bands I've been in the past, it was like, can we make this a career? Can we quit our day jobs and stuff like that? So I think being realistic about what you're hoping to get out of it is the best advice I could give to younger people, because I've learned that lesson over, 16, 17 years,
right?
As opposed to young fellas and girls that are starting out now in bands, 16, 17, 18, 19 years of age and thinking, that's going to happen. I'd also say the most important thing too is also have an ability to generate an income for yourself. Don't just throw all your eggs in one basket and think that you're going to make it as a rock star. Like, I've always had a job the entire time through pursuing a career in music. I'd save up all my annual leave and for tours, but I'd always have a way to support myself so that I could inject money into the band and contribute. And most of the bands I've been in that kind of, did okay. We had that agreement where everybody would kind of throw some money into a pot to give us the resources that we needed to pay for services like Chris, have a publicist and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, I guess number one piece of advice I give to young bands and young artists is know what you want out of it. If what you want out of it is to just be creative and to play some local shows and maybe jump on a support slot, here and there, be okay with that. Be happy with that if that's your outcome. If your outcome is, I want to make this a career, be realistic about the style of music that you play. Be realistic about the size of your potential audience. Have a plan about what resources and what network you're going to build behind you. Because if you don't have those things and you just think you're just going to make it and someone's just going to tap you on the shoulder and go, hey, you're going to be a star, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, well, so I want to say something to the audience that listen to the show is that I used to play in a band back in Sydney back in 2000 to 2004 until the guitarist decided to go on a big bender and sold all the equipment, and basically he took all the equipment down to cash converters and hooked it in. And we're talking drums, amplifiers, guitars, everything. And we were just about to go in to do our first demo. To this day, no one actually heard the songs that I wrote and some of the other stuff that we perform. Well, I've been doing karaoke for the last 8 years, but here's the thing. While this pandemic's been going on, I've been really thinking about going to a studio and doing some tracks and start recording some of my material, and plus a couple of covers that I've got in the pipeline. Maybe it's time for me to step up to the plate and give back to what I really love. And what you just said, Sam, is like the passion and the dedication and the direction and focus where you want to go should be the number one priority. And I remember when I was playing the drums back in Sydney in 2000, I started at the age of 10 playing the drums. And then it got me into the school band and so forth. And then I started to hang around blokes in their 40s when I was 20. And some of these blokes had an alcohol addiction, and that destroyed the whole band. So my point is, ladies and gentlemen that listening, I will be making some type of arrangement to getting some of these songs that I have in the pipeline for over 20 years. One of the songs called Little Highway 1 was about a girl who got hooked on drugs, into prostitution. And it's kind of like the similar story to Poison, Fallen Angel, but I'm putting a bit more of a spin on it because she goes into rehab, she comes out of it, and then she becomes a better person. So look forward to that because I'm thinking about getting it out there. I mean, I'm now 40, going to 41, and I think it's now time people start listening to some of the songs that I put together 20 years ago. But I want to get that heavy touch. I've been changing the Sam. This is the problem I have. For the last 20 years, I've been changing the rhythm section completely because it started out as a soft ballad. Then it got into a power ballad, and then it got into more of a heavier style. I am thinking about driving this to the extreme, like going full tilt with hard rock, bit like rat, early radish, early wasps type of thing. So I'm thinking about going that. So I've got to do it, man. I've really got to do it.
You got to chase your dreams, man.
Yeah, well, the thing is, they always call me the rock star down at karaoke. I mean, I do stuff from the old days like Led Zeppelin, and don't get me this thing Run to the Hills because I lose breath halfway through the chorus. but I can do Maiden, I can do all of them. But the thing is, going back onto Daemon Pyre, looking back at your career, is there any one particular highlight, or there's multiple of highlights that you can actually be proud of? Because when you came, like I remember you came to Adelaide, I think it was at New Dead, or it might have been New Dead, or you just came as a support band to play with Truth Corroded.
We've done both of those things, yep.
Yeah. Well, matter of fact, you mentioned King Parrot earlier. Can you just imagine now with the restrictions that Matt Young won't be able to go in the crowd and do what he does? I mean, he just ripped that freaking audience apart. The last time I saw him on stage, there was a cardboard box and you used to have your beer holders in it. Well, there was no beers in it. He just threw it like a frisbee and it just kept getting flung around and he jumped into the crowd and still flinging this cardboard box around. That unfortunately, with these things, situation at hand, those things won't happen because they're going to put these restrictions, and it comes down to this: how are we going to meet our idols again? You like and meet the greats. How are they going to play out? Not going to be any body-to-body contact, but will we still be able to meet them? How are they going to perform on stage? They've got to be 1.5 meters apart from each other. I don't know.
Honestly, man, I think it's just it's a holding pattern at the moment. I wouldn't be overly concerned that this pandemic is going to take over the world for the rest of our, natural.
No, exactly.
I think it's about the industry and the artists surviving as best they possibly can. Sorry, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't be too worried that it's going to last for all that long, because the reality is that most of the world wants to get back to normal. Economies can't survive, and the entertainment economy is just like any other. It needs to keep moving and start to rebuild itself. So I wouldn't be overly concerned that it's going to last for forever, because it won't. And what'll happen is that once the world gets back to normal, is that there'll be this massive swing in the opposite direction. The market will just get flooded with shows and the live.
Can you just imagine the ticket sales when the concert starts? Because this is what everyone's craving for. They just want to get entertainment, get the mind off the stupid virus.
Yeah, that's right, man. And that's the thing. You were saying before, you were asking me about memorable stuff and memorable moments, and I guess that's what led to thinking about Youngie and his crazy antics. I mean, Youngie actually was our band manager towards the end of Deamon Pyre. He was looking after us, and we'd gone on tour with King Parrot about a year or two earlier, and we learned a lot, about just being a band on tour and working hard, and despite the fact that we were all older guys who had a bit of experience.
Yeah.
Even just watching King Parrot and learning from them, and learning from like the way that they merchandise, the way that they brought humor and fun into things, which was, really quite clever, given that their sort of style of grindcore was quite abrasive and in your face, and then to have that element of humor was something that I think a lot of bands can learn from. But look, in terms of memorable moments for Deamon Pyre, I think the first time we got featured in a magazine, like most people, that's a pretty cool thing. Like, we got put in a poster mag, that, I grew up putting their posters on my walls, and we're just like, oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Playing with bands that I look up to, they say never meet your heroes, but I got to say that I've been really lucky that over the years I've gotten to, I've opened up for At the Gates, and they're probably one of my biggest influences, and I got to, have drinks with Tomas at 1 o'clock in the morning in the Metro Green Room, and, that was pretty insane. That was with my previous band, but like Deamon Pyre, we got to open up for Creator and Vader, and that was a sold out show, and the audience was just insane, and really they were there early, to support us as well, and that blew us away. Touring Indonesia as a band was bonkers, just to go to a foreign country and explore, and a country that's so different to ours, and to explore parts of Central Java, for example. We played a show in the middle of the jungle, for a few hundred kids. We played a show in the middle of a rice field, and then got invited back to the local elders' village to have like a meal with all the town. We almost died at least twice because our crazy Indonesian driver and tour manager, they drive like maniacs, and we did like a 12-hour drive in the bus from one place to the next, and almost like drove off a cliff.
Yeah.
It was, I have to say that some of most of the experiences I've had in music, especially in Deamon Pyre, are memorable for a lot of different reasons.
It is, man. I mean, I remember the first time I went to Canada in 2002, and you just got to take this, man. Every time I was with somebody, they say, Jamie, say Dingo ate me baby. I said, Dingo ate no frickin' baby. Crikey, Jamie, crikey. No, he's a hero back home, but no, I'm here to learn your slang, not mine. But no, just to see the world, and especially at a young age, like in your teen, like your 20s and your 30s, seeing the world is a big place, and seeing the different cultures. That's why I opened my eyes up. I just want to touch on this point. I love the Aboriginal community, especially the elder with the dream time and all of that. But when I went over to Canada and went to the native Indian tribes and whatnot, it opened a whole different spectrum of what I thought. Not the racial thing, nothing to do with racism. It was just being taught, and it's like their culture is no different than the Aboriginal culture. It's all spiritual, and that's what got me a bit more of awareness of the world as we know it. And seeing it at the age of 23 open a whole different spectrum of life. And with you guys going overseas in that 20s, even 30s, that would have been the same type of experience for you guys to see that village that you mentioned going back there again. It's just refreshing, and you can always cherish that till when you pass away.
Yeah, exactly, man. And so it was definitely one of those sorts of experiences. And I look back on the photos and stuff from touring places like Japan and Indonesia and stuff, and where the culture is quite different from our own. And I think to myself that you can get on a plane and go visit some of these places, but the level to which we experienced their cultures was different. When we played a show in a place called Bekasi in Indonesia, and there was like well over 1,000 people there. So just to turn up as an Aussie band and see that, just a sea of people, and get rushed on stage because there was a bunch of corrupt cops there that wanted to shut the show down, and if it ran over time, they were going to try and steal money from the promoter, so that we got like 13 seconds to set up on stage, and it's like 45 degrees and 150% humidity, like experiences like that. That's not like getting on a plane and going to visit some place and, hanging out in a hotel. It's a very real and a very visceral experience, you know,
Yeah.
to do that as a band, you know. So yeah, very, very lucky that we've been able to have some experiences like that.
Yeah. Before we wrap it up, I know we've spoken about an hour or so now, and we just had that little glitch. The power went out for some reason, then it came back on and just shut the whole thing down. But anyway, we got it up and running. Have you got any type of what do you call it, a spinal tap type of moment for your experience? Because every band that I've spoken to, they've got some type of story that they've waken up in a different place, they didn't know how to get there, or they lost their keys, or matter of fact, the drummer from our Kira got drunk playing, and the next minute waking up in a pile of bushes in the middle of Adelaide and didn't know where he was. But yeah, you got any type of stories like that?
Well, it's funnily enough, we don't have any like drunk stories per se, because we were actually well known as being a band that didn't really do that. Like most bands, like after a show, you know, or they go on tour and they'd have drinks, or whatever. We had this thing where we had pancakes. Our big thing, like to the extent that some of our local bandmates used to call us Pancake Pyre, because we'd go on tour and we'd find like the local pancake joint, and we'd get together and they eat pancakes together. So yeah, generally speaking, you don't end up after a pancake session, you know, with no clothes on in the bushes, the way you would after a big drinking sesh. But like I've seen it happen, because like we did a tour in Japan in my previous band, and the singer of a pretty big French death metal band that was on tour with us, it was his birthday when we were in Osaka, and we literally lost him and all had to leave to the next to the next city in the bus, and he ended up having to find his way 4 hours to the next city in a place with, you know, not speaking the language. So I've seen that happen, because it turned out he had fallen asleep drunk in a bloody alleyway behind the venue or something. So I definitely have seen it happen. In terms of myself and those kind of like, you know, spinal tapish kind of sort of things. Oh look, over the years, man, I've you know, had crazy stuff happen where, you know, wheels come off vans, you hit wombats. I remember in one of my last bands, my poor guitarist, he hit a kangaroo, and literally after 10 minutes on the side of the road checking it for damage, got back on the highway, and about 30 seconds later hit a bloody wombat. You know, anything that can happen will happen when you're in a touring band. Yeah, I'll probably keep the rest of the stories to myself, but yeah, if you're in a touring band and you're on the road, there's always a good chance that something can go a little bit awry.
Yeah, I remember being on the bus with the boys back when we were up in Roma in early 2000. We're just doing a couple of little show gigs. We played 4 gigs in 3 days, and we went up to Roma from Sydney just for a couple of 100 people, and it was like a little. It wasn't a festival. It's like a little fake type of thing, right? Well, coming back, we're driving in the middle of the night, and this wild boar out of nowhere hit the side of the bus, and the door got absolutely shattered, and the head of the wild boar was stuck inside the bus while his leg kicking out on the side. And I said to the driver, "Pull over, man, pull over." We ended up getting him out, almost biting with his tough and that. He ran away, but it was a massive freaking hole. Like, you could see where his butt was, you could see where his head was, blood there. I said to the guy, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Jamie, get into your drum bag and just get the duct tape." I said, "What are you going to do?" "We're going to tape the freaking door." So for the next 300k back to Brisbane before we get back on the plane, we just duct taped the freaking door with no glass, just duct tape. And we had a bit of extra air conditioning for the next So yeah, that was awesome. But just finish up on this. I remember this philosophy too. Sometimes meeting your childhood hero or idol could be your worst day. And the only thing I can say about that is the most experience that I've had, like with Angus Young, Steve Harris, Brian Strawbeard from Soulwork, I never really had a bad type of reaction, but I have heard from a few friends of mine about Dave Mustaine from Megadeth. I suppose it depends what type of day he's having and whatnot. And that goes with anyone. Have you ever experienced some type of put offish in some of your heroes in your life?
As I said before, man, I've been really lucky. I think for the most part, I've been really privileged because I've both been in bands and also worked in the media side as well. I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of my heroes and a lot of famous people. I got to meet Sophie Monk. I got to meet Jessica Pimentel from Orange is the New Black. I got to meet Tomas from At the Gates. I got to meet, guys from Darkest Hour. I've met Richard Dawkins. I've got to meet so many incredible people, and every single one of them has been amazing. There's one person from a European metal band that I've supported once before, and that particular member is no longer in that band. But that particular member was not a very nice person. I won't go into too much detail about who they were because I just don't roll that way. But yeah, it's what I will say is it's infrequent. For the most part, people who play heavy music are good, decent, kind, fun, and friendly people, and that's been my experience over the years.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. I mean, with the privileges that I've been given from not only from Chris Marek but from all other publishers around the world, I'm very grateful. And it's not about me kissing up anyone behind it. It's the hard work that I put in. I mean, hey, we need more people like this. We've got Hagee in Melbourne doing this. We've got Higo. We've got me. We've got Andy Dowling from Lloyd doing his podcast. And it's a great guy to talk to. I had him on a couple of times, Andrew Dowling from Lloyd. But the thing is, the people that you make connections with, you cherish them and you don't take them for granted. And that's why I want to thank you, Sam, for taking your time speaking on the history and not only that, a little bit about life in general, because this is what I like to touch on. It's some of these media outlets, and I'm not bitching or moaning about them, but what I'm trying to say is they only channel, and it's like a robot thing. It's the same questions after the same question. It's repetitious. Me, on the other hand, I'm not trying to blow my own horn here, but I like to keep it organic. No scripts, just off the cuff, unedited. You can swear. You can have a Cooper's Pale Ale if you want. I haven't had a beer in this episode, but yeah, it's off the cuff, and I think we need more media outlets here in Australia because, like you said, now it's a time that the Australian local talent can really have a massive resurgence now because everyone wants to freaking see a band, and until that comes, people can make more singles. I know it's going to cost money and all that, but this is where the proof is in the pudding that the Australian talent, and it's a shitload of talent out there, can really make a difference now.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Yep. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you to all the listeners on Blood, Sweat, and Metal / The Rocket Diary. If you want to come back on, Sam, and talk about life, you're more than welcome to.
Thanks,
I know I've got to talk to Chris about it. And matter of fact, we are going to line up a one-on-one interview with Chris Marek because I want to know his background a little bit more. I know Chris, and he's going to come on and talk about how the whole thing worked. And he used to work at Fox Studios and stuff like that. We are going to get him on. But
he's a good guy.
It all depends on his son.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Sam, and stay with us. I'll give you a proper farewell. Guys, go and check out Daemon Pyre. Check out the new digital album and go to their website. Get their merchandise, whatever you can, and support them, even though they don't really need that much support. No, go and support them. Go and support them. Right? And you never know, they might give you a beer back if they can post it to you. But anyway, check it out, guys, and as always, stay thirsty for metal. Catch you guys later.
Thanks, man.